A few weeks ago, Andycine sent me this monitor, the C5. This is a full HD monitor, basically made to be put onto your camera so that you can monitor what you're filming better with a brighter display and also have access to a bunch of tools and things that are helpful when doing, for example, your exposure as well as other things. Now, in this video, I want to go over this monitor, also compare it in terms of its brightness and visibility to the two other monitors that I use here in the studio, which is the Feelworld T7 and the Atomos Ninja V. Now, before we jump in, a quick disclaimer. Andycine sent me this monitor so that I can make this review for you. They have no input on the video and they do not see the video before it goes live. Now, I already unboxed this monitor and I tested it over the last couple of weeks. Now, when you unbox it from the paper carton here, you end up having this little bag right here. And that actually is already something that this company does really interestingly well. And that is that they provide a bunch of things next to the actual monitor. One of those things being this kind of soft shell case with which you can actually transport all the cables, the monitor, and the holder. Now, when you open this up, you find that on the top right here, we have this mesh with a zipper. And in there, I, for example, have the battery right now. There's a micro HDMI to full-size HDMI cable and an adapter so that you can put this monitor directly onto your camera into the cold shoe mount. And I think there's also an Allen key as well as a USB-C to USB-A cable. Now, when we flip this part here over, then you see the backside of the monitor and we can actually take this out by just simply pulling it out of there. And now we can put this aside and there we have the monitor C5 from Andycine. Now, one thing that you can see right away is that there's a little bit of text right here on the monitor which says ultra bright. And that is actually pretty accurate. However, you will see in the comparison with these other monitors that brightness is not necessarily always the only thing to care about when judging that kind of thing. But after all, it is a very bright monitor and you will see that going forward. Now, on this side here, we have HDMI in as well as HDMI out. This is pass-through. You also have a headphone jack so that you can listen to whatever is coming from your camera or whatever other device. This monitor has a DC in with 12 volts as well as a DC out with 8 volts so that you can actually power other things from here as well, either by using a battery or by providing the 12 volt power in from here. Then, of course, we have tripod mounts. There's one at the bottom and there's one at the side right here. There's an SD card slot for firmware upgrades as well as installing LUTs onto this monitor. Then on the back, we have a battery slot for the NPF style batteries. And this one here was included in the package that I have. And this is actually kind of neat. You can actually press this button and then you can see how much charge this battery has left in it. So that's kind of neat. And of course, you can just put it in here and just slide it into place. This here on the other side is a connection port for a wireless transmitter. And I think that you can also use this for some type of specific battery mounting. Another thing that is actually kind of neat is that the battery is also USB-C chargeable. So you don't actually need a NPF style battery charger for this specific battery. But of course, if you are using other equipment with NPF style batteries, you probably also have a charger for that. Now, in terms of control, this monitor actually has either this wheel up here, which you can also press. So it's a press and turn. And you have this button on the top left right here, which is the on off as well as the touch enable and disable. And also it has a touch display. So you can actually go through the menus and do your settings with your finger, which is also really interesting and makes it really easy to kind of use this monitor. Now, something that I already mentioned is this adapter so that you can actually fasten this thing to your camera in the cold shoe mount. And it's actually kind of neat that they include this in the package because this is something that easily costs between 20 and 40 euros if you want this, for example, from small rig and the monitor that you buy does not have this included. This feels like it's a all metal build and it is really sturdy and also really hard to kind of like twist, but it actually feels like a quality piece and that's what's important. But now, of course, I think the most important part, of course, is actually looking at the monitor and the features that it actually has as well as how the image looks on this. Now I'm going to connect a HDMI cord here from my studio, and then I can just simply turn this on. And now we have a bit of an infinite loop going on. We have a bright image, that's for sure. And you also have a bit of a battery indicator up here in the corner, which is already helpful. As you can see also, or as you might be able to see, this is currently a 1080p image. However, this also works if you, for example, have a camera that is outputting a 4K signal up to 30 frames per second, then this monitor can also display that signal. However, it of course does not change the fact that the monitor itself is a full HD monitor. Now, when you want to go into the menu, you simply press the wheel at the top here, and then you can either navigate the menus by going up and down with the wheel, or you can simply just press on something on the screen and make use of the menus that way. Now here in the system settings, you have those things like firmware, as well as the fan speed, as well as volume, and a user group setting, which basically means that you have actually control over different presets, basically how you want the monitor to be set up, and you can do that in user groups. But one thing that is really important is the fan speed. And that is because this monitor actually has a, in my opinion, pretty loud fan. And it's not just that it is loud. The problem that I have with this fan is that it is actually relatively high pitched. And that can be a little bit of an annoyance. I definitely hear this fan much more than, for example, the fan on the Atomos Ninja V, which I have either gotten used to, or it's just simply a quieter or less disturbing fan noise. The Feelworld T7, on the other hand, does not have a fan at all. However, that also comes with the territory of this being a much, much brighter monitor than the Feelworld monitor. And that is the main reason why these types of monitors need a fan, because producing a brighter image also produces more heat. Now, when we go back into the menu and we can jump over to, let's say, color, you can see you have those things like brightness, contrast, backlight, and all those things. And if you want to make use of the maximum brightness of this monitor, you're actually not going to go into brightness much, because if you see this on the screen, if I change this, this is actually just simply blowing out the image or making it really, really dark. So I usually leave that at around 50. And if I want to change the brightness of the monitor, then I actually have to go into the setting that is called backlight. And there you have either a setting which is called auto, because the monitor actually has a light sensitivity sensor up here in the top and can actually kind of try to make it a useful brightness, or you can either also have control over this manually. So you can actually set the brightness, for example, to 100% or something less extreme. Now, when you do this, then you actually are controlling more of the brightness of the screen. And with that, you're not just blowing out the image as you would when you are using the simple brightness slider. That is not the correct way to do that. Then, of course, we also have contrast, saturation, sharpness, and those kind of things. However, those are usually something that at least I leave completely alone. Those might be useful if you are wanting to somehow calibrate this screen into something else. Now, the next point is image. And here you can see you have kind of those features like flipping the image around if you want to have a 1:1 pixel ratio, which in this case doesn't really make any much change because it is already a full HD signal and we are also displaying it in full HD. So that's pretty much the same. Then we have anamorphic desqueezing, which is built into here. You can zoom into the image. You can choose different aspect ratios that you want to display. However, also that is something that I usually leave at auto. And then you can also change the scan mode. So if you want to overscan or underscan the image depending on other factors. Then we also have markers. So you can, for example, have a 16:9 or 16:10, 4:3, and so on, markers on the screen so that you can basically orient yourself on those whilst you are already shooting. You can, of course, also have a safe area and a cross in the middle. I tend to use the cross in the middle just to have something to orient myself with. And then we can go over to the assist features. And this is actually something that more often than not is actually really, really interesting because you have things like focus assist. We have zebras, which show which kind of areas are going to be too bright Then we also have false color, which can be really cool. And this now shows us how bright things are here on the screen so that we can actually make a judgment based on that. And I just did some improvements here, so you probably are better with seeing how things are going on here on the screen now. Then you also have the options to actually have LUTs already pre-installed. Now, this is something that you do with the SD card. You simply pop that into your computer, make sure that it is formatted with the MS-DOS FAT, and then you move the files onto this drive. However, you really have to make sure that it is simply only the files that you want to install on here. Because when, for example, with macOS, you have those dot and then the file name files, those will have to be removed. And you have to make sure that you are not having those files on your SD card, because this thing will basically get completely confused with that and not load those files. You basically have to reboot the monitor and then you can continue. However, you will only see the files up to that one dot file that you would have on that card. I had to figure that out the hard way, so that's why I am saying this now. Now, when you have LUTs installed, like for example, I have here these three, then you can choose between them. Let's say I want to go with the faithful, and then I can activate that. And now you can see we have an image that basically has a correction on top of it. It is a really useful feature to be able to preview your LUT on the monitor right here. And that's of course specifically interesting if you don't have a camera that also can use LUTs in itself. And that, for example, is the case with the Canon EOS Rs that I have here in the studio. Now, the last point, or rather the top one, is waveforms. And you can actually have a ton of them active, and you can actually just have one main screen for all kinds of analysis activated, and then you have a screen like this. So you have a vector graph and you have the waveforms right here with the color differentiation. And of course, you also have a volume that you can see here, how that is coming in. Now, when you don't want all of those things active, and instead, for example, you want just the waveform, then you can see that right there on the screen, and you have that as a helpful scope for you to kind of like see what is going on in the image if you want to change anything, or if you are happy with your exposure. And of course, you also can activate the audio meters. Then you have those on the screen, and you always know what is going on in the audio department. And that's basically all of the different features that are available on this monitor. I think they are really comprehensive and powerful, and they give you so many other functionalities that you may not have when you are using just a camera that does not have those kind of features available built in. Now, as I've mentioned in the beginning, I actually went outdoors and compared the brightness and look of this monitor in comparison to the Feelworld T7, which I use in my teleprompter, and the Atomos Ninja V, which I use for recording here in the studio, so that I have the raw files in 4K from the two Canon EOS R cameras. And I have to say that I was actually kind of surprised how bright the Andycine C5 actually is. It is already, based on specs, the brightest monitor out of those three, with about 3,300 CD per square meter, which, to be honest, I don't really know what it means, but it is obviously a comparison in terms of how bright this monitor can go, and the higher number is better. With 3,300, the Andycine is the brightest monitor out of the three. Then we have the Atomos Ninja V with around 1,000 CD per square meter, and then the Feelworld T7 comes in at just 450 CD per square meter. And that is actually something that was quite obvious in this test. However, again, it is also not the only thing to care about with the brightness levels, because from my own personal looking at those monitors, what I was able to see is that the Atomos Ninja V is actually a HDR monitor, and the monitor panel that is built into the Andycine C5 does not seem to have the capabilities of actually displaying the same quality image the Atomos Ninja V can produce. So that is something to keep in mind here. This monitor is incredibly bright, but it is somewhat at the detriment of image quality that you can see here, specifically in the brighter areas of the image, which does not happen with the Atomos Ninja V. There you have much more detail in, for example, the sky here on the test footage. Another thing that's really helpful in terms of this monitor being extremely bright is that you actually also have a pretty good viewing angle. And it doesn't really matter if you are in direct sunlight or in the shade. Of course, in the shade you will see a little bit more, but generally speaking, I was able to see things fine with this monitor. Now the Feelworld, on the other hand, is significantly darker, and that is something that is really, really obvious. However, with the Feelworld monitor, you also get a shade inside of the box that you purchase, and that way you can actually help yourself out a lot by being able to see better with the shade on top of this monitor. Now overall, I was really impressed with the Andycine C5 monitor. It's an incredibly bright little monitor that is easy to pack, easy to use, and has tons of features packed in. There are actually just two things that I would like to go over here that I did not really like all that much. The first thing is the fan built into this monitor. It is extremely high pitched and it is really, really annoying. And in comparison, the Atomos Ninja V also has a fan, but it is way less disturbing than the fan built in here. So that is definitely something to be aware if you want to have the monitor close to whatever microphone you are using. The other thing has to do with the website and how they're informing customers about, for example, new firmware and those kind of things. And I have to say that overall, I have not had bad experiences with Andycine and their equipment. They are doing some solid stuff there. However, what I did find is that they don't really have a information storage way or a information page where you easily can find information like, for example, how to install a firmware upgrade. I did find a firmware upgrade on their blog, but there you simply just had a file to download from Google Drive with no instructions whatsoever what to do next. And I actually had to reach out to customer support who were responsive, so that was great, but I had to manually reach out to them to get a step-by-step guide as to how to get the firmware onto this device. And that is not necessarily all that easy because you have to, for example, format the SD card into a specific format for this to actually work in the firmware upgrade process. So that's something to keep in mind here, that a company like, for example, Atomos has a much more robust solution for these types of things, like, for example, firmware upgrades and those things. But now, closing things out, how do I compare this monitor to the Feelworld as well as the Atomos Ninja V? Now, first things first, of course, this monitor is not the same thing as the Atomos Ninja V. This is just a monitor. The Atomos Ninja V is a recorder and a monitor. However, Atomos also sells a monitor that is called the Shinobi, which is basically the same that the Atomos Ninja V is, just without the recording capabilities and some other ports to connect to, for example, SDI cameras. In this comparison, I would say the panel on the Atomos Ninja V, and I'm guessing that the Shinobi has the same panel there, at least from the technical specifications, it is extremely close. The panel of the Atomos Ninja V is higher quality and can show you more detail, for example, in areas which you already see blown out on the Andycine C5. However, the Andycine C5 is still 100 euros cheaper or $100 cheaper than, for example, the Shinobi from Atomos. So this here costs around 260, the Shinobi is around 360, and the Atomos Ninja V, if you want to see the full price, it's around 660. Now, right now, I found that the Atomos Ninja V, for example, on B&H was around $400, which is an incredibly good deal if you are looking at the fact that that also is a 4K 60 frames per second ProRes recorder, so that might be something that you want to consider. And that leaves me to compare the Feelworld T7. I wish the Feelworld were as bright as this monitor, to be honest. The Feelworld, however, is also the cheapest out of the bunch. It has a bunch of the same features that you also have here. It is slightly bigger and also a little bit cheaper. So if you want to have a slightly bigger monitor that is not as bright, but maybe is enough for you with the, for example, the hood on there, then you might also want to go for that at around 160 euros. Then you also have the Andycine C5 for 260, the Shinobi for around 360, and then the Atomos Ninja V for 650 if you don't get a better deal. Overall, I think this is a solid monitor and it will definitely be helpful when you are outdoors shooting in bright daylight and you want to still be able to see what is going on. You want to use some LUTs, and of course also use those scopes, waveforms, false color, and more. It's definitely a cool tool to have in your backpack and makes filming specifically outdoors that much easier.